You're listening to The Moose and the Loose, your 10 minutes action-packed financial podcast with your host, Mike Yahoo. Hey, what's up, Market Moose? This is Mike from The Moose on the Loose. I hope you are doing well today. Today, I am answering a question from one of my DSR member, and I thought it was quite interesting, mostly because I realized that sometimes when I explain some part of my strategies, maybe on one side I'm not clear, or maybe we have all that tendency of like do quick summary in our mind to make everything simple and easy to understand, but we miss some details that are sometimes super important. So first, when I talk about my strategy, it is my strategy. You know, sometimes like people are talking, yeah, Warren Buffett does this or Warren Buffett does that. Cool. Good for Warren Buffett. But there are two things here. First, we are not Warren Buffett. We do not have billions of dollars in our bank account. So trying to mimic his strategy would not make much sense because we're not him. We're not in a financial situation. We do not have the same goals. So trying to mimic somebody else's strategy to the dot could be a problem. And number two, actually, we cannot do that to the dot. So some people, when I say I stay invested, some people will say, but Warren Buffett has billions of dollars laying around in cash waiting for an opportunity. And I'm like, all right, that's good. That's fair. But he also has he had more than about 40% of its holdings in one single stocks for over a decade, which was Apple. So technically, do you agree on all of his positions and all of his moves? Because if you really want to mimic someone to get the same results, you have to do exactly what they do and be in the same situation. So when I hear that Nick Suzuki is eating 5 eggs in the morning for breakfast, well, if I eat 5 eggs, I'm not going to be a number one center player in the NHL anytime soon. That's not going to happen. And the Abs will not knock on my door. I need to first be in the same position, which I'm a bit older and I do not have any skills on skating. So chances are I'm not going to play in the NHL, even if I eat eggs. So you have to be careful with that. So now back to my strategy. Now that I've very long introduction, so sorry about that. So Kevin, I want to thank you for asking the question, and now we're going to do a deep dive on it. So I've discussed several times about my strategy around risk management to let my winners run up to a certain level. So that certain level is the trick that I use to make all my decision easier is to imagine what would be the worst for any of my position, regardless of the stock. So that the stock that I have doesn't matter. I look at my largest holding. What is the worst that could happen before I sell the stock to a loss? Probably to lose about 50% of it. So at one point, I'm just going to get rid of it, and that's going to be fine. But I could lose 50%. So my exposure to risk is 50% of my largest position. That is the exposure to risk I have to that stock. So now imagine that stock is 8% of my portfolio. My total exposure to risk is losing 4% of my entire portfolio. So the trick that I use here is to determine what is the maximum I'm willing to lose. So what is the maximum that I'm willing to have as an exposure to risk on one stock? For me, it's 5%. So therefore, I allow my winners to grow and outperform all the rest of my portfolio until they reach 10% weight of my portfolio. And at this point, and that was the first thing that Kevin asked me, and he's like, yeah, so following your rule, if it goes up to super high level, you drop it down drastically. So first, I don't do that. What I would do is if I'm at 10%, if it goes at 11 or 12, I would bring it back to 8 to 9%. I would not bring it back to 5%. I would really just benefit from my winner as much as I could while taking a little bit of profit just to be on the right side of my risk exposure. So the downside of this strategy actually is it forces me to sell stocks a little bit more often than expected. So, and I do that once a year. So I never do that quarterly or anything else. So only once a year I will do the rebalance of my portfolio. But I already sold 3 times Apples since 2014. And of course, over the first years, I did not sold. But over the past, I mean, like maybe like 5 or 6 years, I've sold 3 times some shares of Apples, and I will likely have to sell again at the end of 24, or maybe not. But anyway, so it kind of like creates a recurring like sell instead of waiting a little bit more. But since I don't pay for transaction fees, I don't mind. So the second part of the question from Kevin, and this is where I think it's really important to do a deep dive, is he was saying, okay, so imagine that you have like one position at 10%, and you want to bring it back to 5 to have like 2 positions equally weighted at 5% each. So position A and position B, just to diminish the impact of losing 50% in position A. So his reasoning was, okay, so now I have like 2 stocks in my portfolio, but if I look at the impact of loss of 50% of each of them, it still equals to 5%. So 50% of 5% is 2.5, and then another 2.5 for position B. So I have like more holdings, but the same exposure to risk. And that is mathematically right. However, if you have 2 companies that are not in the same sector with not the same business model, you actually improve your diversification. So it's one thing to say, okay, so I'm going to sell my Apple and I'm going to buy some Samsung. Well, all right, so you're pretty much in the same turf right now, same playground, so you're not helping yourself. The classic example that I like to talk about is the banks, right? So instead of having like 10% of holdings in National Bank, I'm going to have like 5% of Royal Bank, 5% of National Bank. Well, yeah, I'm not improving my diversification that much because same sector, same business model, facing the same types of risks. So even though they're 2 different companies, not that much. But if I have 10% of National Bank, I sell 5% of it, and the other 5 I buy Canadian National Railway. Well, then a railroad and a bank, not necessarily correlated. So then I improve my diversification. And if I do that enough, so if I hold a basket of like 20, 30, 35 stocks, right now I'm at about like 35 stocks. If I a little bit less than 30 if I ignore my Smith Maneuver, because those are like very small position. If I include everything, I probably reach 38, 39, maybe 40, but not more than that, not more than 40 position, but in various sectors, various subsectors. So another example, I have like a few stocks in the material sector, but I have CCL that is in the packaging industry and also making labels and RFIDs. And I also have Stella Jones, like working in the lumber industry. So what's the link between lumber and packaging? Absolutely nothing, right? So this is why it's great to have different subsectors on top of different sectors in your portfolio. So the likelihood of having a crisis in lumber, in railroad, in banks, and in packaging, and then if you add like, I don't know, a restaurant company, and then a military defense company, and a tech company, well, then it's almost impossible. And even like, let's take a look at COVID, for example. When there was the COVID crash, big lockdown. So of course, a lot of sectors and many stocks dropped. However, essential needs, they did well. Like grocery stocks, Couche-Tard did well. And then you can think of the technology sector. Actually, if we would have been stuck in a lockdown for like several months or like a few years, technology stocks would have continued to soar like there's no tomorrow, because we would have relied on technology to keep on living. So those type of businesses would have completely skyrocketed, and other types of industries such as the energy sector, or such as like everything that is like related to consumer experience, such as like travel, well, of course, they would have died big time. But as you can see, if you have like a little bit of everything, well, then you are not fully exposed to one single crisis, because in a crisis, there's a lot of losers, but there's also winners, and it happens every single time. And during the financial crisis, we quickly realized that we had the best bank in the world, and Canadian banks did incredibly well after the crisis, while other banks across the world, in the US, in Europe, did not do well at all. So it's all about balance, and it's all about finding thriving companies. Speaking of which, you can download my guide to know a little bit more about creating a dividend income for life. That's the name of the guide. Dividend income for life. It's explaining my strategy, my diversification, my focus on low yield, high growth stocks, and how it's actually a lot better, even for retirees, to focus on low yield, high dividend growth stocks than focusing on high yield. You can download it for free by entering your email at dividendstocksrock.com/income. So it's dividendstocksrock.com/income. Not that complicated, right? Dividend income for life. If you're already in my mailing list, you receive every Friday a reminder link where you can download all our free resources as well. So that's it. All right, Moose. Tomorrow I'm bringing you back to Iceland for a quick 10 minutes. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what happened over there, what I've loved, and yeah, that was like one of my favorite trips that I've done. So that's a lot to say because I'm a big traveler. So I cannot wait to tell you more about this, but that's going to be tomorrow. And until then, don't forget to stay invested. Hey, welcome to the disclaimer. If you're listening to The Moose on the Loose, you cannot really expect me to give you buy or sell recommendation or financial advice, right? You're here for fun, you're here for information and some entertainment. But I am not your financial advisor, I am not your broker, so therefore I'm not liable if you're losing money after listening to the podcast. If you're looking for some advice, go see a professional. If not, you can enjoy the show and do your due diligence after it.